Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Today's story is about a man who, after a deal to save his family's company, enters into a contract marriage with a woman he has just met. This is a story of transformation, of discovering real love where it was least expected. Let's see what happens when business becomes personal. Stay tuned for the next part of the story where we dive deeper into the complexities of their fake marriage turning real. How will they handle the unexpected emotions that are starting to surface? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. As the days went by, Richard couldn't shake the thoughts of Claire. What had started as a business arrangement began to feel more complicated. He knew he was supposed to keep his emotions out of it, but something about her presence in his life made that almost impossible. He found himself looking forward to their meetings, to the quiet moments they shared when no one else was around. The way she listened to him, her gentle words, and how she seemed to understand the weight of his decisions without judgment. It was something he hadn't realized he needed. But this was just business. He had to remind himself of that. Claire, too, was beginning to feel the strain of keeping their relationship purely professional. She had agreed to this contract marriage for one reason: financial stability. She was well aware of the agreement. No emotions, no real connection, just two people pretending for the public. But as time went on, she saw a side of Richard that was far from the cold, calculating CEO he showed the world. There were moments when he let down his guard, when the stress of his business empire weighed so heavily on him that it was clear he wasn't the man he appeared to be. He was just a person, flawed, vulnerable, and in need of someone to believe in him. One night, after a particularly long day of meetings and events, Claire found herself walking with Richard through the quiet halls of his penthouse. The lights were dim, the city outside barely visible through the heavy glass windows. She had just signed the final set of papers that would stabilize his company for the next few years. She knew it was time for her to leave. This was just business, nothing more. But as she turned to leave, Richard stopped her. "Claire, wait." His voice was uncharacteristically soft. She paused, her hand resting on the doorframe. "What is it?" she asked, turning back to face him. Richard stood there, his eyes not meeting hers, his usual confident demeanor now absent. "I wanted to thank you. I know this deal has been unusual, but you've done more than just help me with the business side of things." He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. "You've been there, and I didn't expect that." Claire didn't know what to say. She had never seen Richard so open before. "You're welcome," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "It's my job. It's what I agreed to do." Richard finally looked at her, his gaze searching, almost as if he were looking for something more. "But you've done more than that. I've had people working for me all my life, Claire, but you're different. You've shown me what it's like to not have everything figured out. You've shown me that it's okay to be vulnerable. I didn't expect that from you." Claire's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel in this moment. She had kept her emotions at bay, knowing what this was. But standing in front of him now, hearing him speak so honestly, it stirred something inside her that she had been trying to suppress. She couldn't help but smile slightly. "Richard, I'm just doing my job. I'm here to help you, and I've done what was asked of me. That's all." Richard stepped closer to her, his voice low. "But that's the thing. I didn't just ask you to help me with the business. I asked you to help me with something that no one else would ever understand. You didn't just do your job, Claire. You cared." Claire took a step back, the distance between them growing. She could feel the weight of the situation, the unspoken words hanging between them. "We can't do this, Richard. This was never supposed to be anything but business. You know that." Richard looked down, his jaw clenched. "I know, but it's hard not to feel something. When everything around me is falling apart, when I have no one else to turn to, you've been there. And I." He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Claire swallowed, her mind racing. She knew what this could turn into. She had always kept herself at arm's length, but now it felt like the walls she had built up were starting to crumble. She had been falling for him, but she couldn't let herself believe it. Not now. Not when it wasn't supposed to be real. "This is dangerous," she whispered. "We can't let it get complicated." Richard stepped back, his expression darkening, as if the realization had just hit him. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'll try to remember that. But it's hard, Claire. You've become more to me than just a contract." The silence between them was heavy, both of them standing there, unsure of how to move forward. Claire knew what she had to do. She had to keep her distance. She had to stay professional. But she couldn't deny that Richard was right. This wasn't just a contract anymore. And deep down, she knew that whatever happened next, their lives would never be the same. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Richard and Claire confront their emotions and decide if they can make this arrangement work or if they will have to let go. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. The next few days were filled with tension. Richard and Claire avoided each other as much as possible, sticking to the plan they had agreed upon, keeping their relationship strictly business. But it wasn't easy. The more time they spent apart, the more Richard found himself thinking about her, replaying the conversation they had the night she left his penthouse. He tried to bury his feelings under the weight of work, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Claire, on the other hand, threw herself into her work, trying to distance herself emotionally from Richard. She reminded herself daily that this arrangement was only temporary. This was just a contract. But when she saw Richard at business meetings or events, there was an undeniable connection. His smile, though rare, still had the power to make her heart race. She couldn't ignore the way his presence seemed to fill the room, or how she felt when he looked at her, like she was more than just a business partner. It wasn't long before their professional facade began to crack. At a company gala, they were forced to interact more than they usually did. As the night wore on, Richard found himself growing more and more frustrated by the way he had to keep up the act. He watched Claire from across the room as she talked with the other guests, her laughter filling the space, her eyes sparkling in a way he had never noticed before. Something inside him shifted. The walls he had built around his heart were starting to crumble. Later that evening, when the gala had slowed down and most of the guests were leaving, Richard found Claire standing by the balcony, gazing out over the city skyline. The night air was cool, and the lights of the city below twinkled like stars. He hesitated for a moment before walking up to her. She turned to face him, her expression guarded but not cold. "Of course," she replied, though she could already sense what was coming. She had known this moment was inevitable. Richard wasn't one to hide his feelings for long. They stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Richard spoke again. Claire's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she thought her heart might beat right out of her chest. She had been prepared for this, but hearing Richard say it out loud felt like a punch to the gut. She had tried so hard to keep her distance, to remind herself that none of this was real. But hearing him speak so openly about his feelings made it impossible to deny the truth any longer. Claire shook her head, her eyes filling with uncertainty. "Richard, this isn't what we agreed on. We promised each other that this would be a business deal, nothing more. You can't just—" But Richard reached out and gently took her hand, silencing her with a soft touch. "I know what we agreed on," he said quietly, "but I can't help how I feel, and I don't want to keep pretending anymore. I've been alone for so long, Claire, and I didn't even realize it until now. You've made me feel things I haven't felt in years. You've made me believe in something again." Claire's heart raced in her chest, but she pulled her hand away. She had to stay strong. She couldn't let herself get swept away by this. Not now. Not when their arrangement was on the verge of ruining everything. "We can't do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This is just a contract, Richard. That's all it can ever be. You can't let yourself fall for me." Richard stared at her for a long moment, as if he were searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice low and firm. Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. She could feel the pull between them, the undeniable attraction that had only grown stronger with each passing day. But she knew that if they crossed that line, everything would change. She couldn't afford to lose herself in this. She couldn't afford to fall for Richard. She couldn't afford to love him. "Because it's not real," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is just a business deal. You can't let yourself get attached." Richard stepped back, his eyes darkening with frustration. "I don't want this to be just a deal anymore. I want something real, Claire. And if you feel the same way, maybe we can figure it out together." Claire took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with everything they had both tried to avoid. She knew this was the moment that could change everything. But she wasn't ready for that yet. "I can't," she said softly, her voice filled with pain. "I can't let myself fall for you." Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Claire and Richard confront their emotions and decide what kind of relationship they truly want. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. The days following their conversation were filled with tension. Richard tried to focus on the business at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to Claire. He could still feel the weight of her words, the cold distance she had put between them. She couldn't let herself fall for him. But every time they interacted, every time he saw her, it became harder for him to believe that this was just a business arrangement. He was beginning to question if it was even possible to keep things professional anymore. Claire, on the other hand, was struggling just as much. She had tried to put up walls, reminding herself that this was all for a purpose. But the more time she spent with Richard, the more she realized that her feelings were growing deeper, despite everything she told herself. She couldn't ignore the way he made her feel, his quiet strength, the way he was always so thoughtful in their conversations, even in moments when it seemed like he was too busy to care. One morning, Richard walked into the office, still carrying the weight of the previous days. As he entered, his assistant greeted him with a quick update on the day's agenda, but he was barely listening. His thoughts kept drifting back to Claire, to the conversation they had on the balcony at the gala. What had he been thinking? He couldn't just forget about her, but was he truly ready for something real, something that wasn't just a contract? Later that afternoon, Richard found himself walking down the corridor of the building, heading toward a meeting that was supposed to be crucial for securing a new deal. But he couldn't focus. His eyes kept flicking toward Claire's office, and before he knew it, he was standing in front of her door, his hand raised to knock. Claire was seated at her desk, her attention focused on the papers in front of her. The door swung open, and she looked up, startled to see Richard standing there. He hesitated, taking a step into the room. He didn't know what he was doing here, why he had come to her now, when things were already so complicated. But there was something inside him that just wouldn't let go. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She had braced herself for this moment, but hearing him say it out loud made her stomach churn. She stood up slowly, walking around her desk to face him. Richard's eyes locked with hers, his gaze intense. "I know, but it's not just business anymore, Claire. I've been trying to ignore it, to push it aside, but I can't. Not when everything I've been focusing on, my work, my company, my life, it all seems empty without you in it." Claire felt her breath catch in her chest. The words he spoke were powerful, yet they terrified her. She had been trying to keep her distance for so long, and now, standing in front of him, she felt the walls she had built around herself begin to crack. Richard stepped closer to her, his voice low but steady. "I don't care about any of that anymore. I care about you, Claire. I need you in my life, more than you know. I don't want this to be just a contract. I want something real, but I can't do it alone." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the tension in the room almost suffocating. Claire felt the weight of his words pressing down on her, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly consider what it would mean to let go of her carefully constructed barriers. Claire looked at him, her heart torn between what she knew was the right thing to do and the pull of her emotions. She had worked so hard to keep things professional, to protect herself. But standing here, facing Richard, she realized that she couldn't ignore how she felt any longer. Richard's face softened as he reached out, taking her hand in his. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. It was real. They stood there for a moment, not knowing what the future would hold, but feeling something between them that had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Claire and Richard face the challenges that come with their newfound feelings for each other. Can they truly make this work, or will their differences tear them apart? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. The days that followed were filled with a strange, quiet tension. Richard and Claire continued their daily routine, but now there was an unspoken understanding between them. The line between business and personal had blurred, and neither of them could pretend that things hadn't changed. Richard tried to focus on the upcoming meeting with the board of directors, but his mind kept drifting back to Claire. She was everywhere, her smile, the way she spoke, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention. Claire, on the other hand, struggled to keep things professional. She kept telling herself that this was just an arrangement, that they had both agreed it would be business as usual. But it was becoming impossible to ignore how much she had started to care for Richard. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to feel so connected to him, to want to be around him all the time. Every time they had a conversation, something inside her shifted. She had tried to keep a wall up, but it was crumbling, piece by piece. One evening, Richard asked Claire to meet him for dinner. He had called it a business dinner, but there was no denying that something else was happening between them. When she arrived at the restaurant, she found him waiting by the window, looking out over the city. His usual business attire was gone, replaced with something more relaxed, and for a moment, he looked like a different person, someone who wasn't burdened by the weight of a billion-dollar empire. "You look nice," she said as she approached, her voice a little unsure. Richard smiled at her, but there was something else in his eyes, something deeper. It made her heart skip a beat. "Thanks," he replied, standing up as she sat down across from him. "I'm glad you came. I've been meaning to talk to you about something. Something important." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "I know we've both been trying to keep this arrangement professional, but the more I think about it, the more I realize that I can't do that anymore. I can't keep pretending this is just a contract. Not with you. Not after everything we've shared." Claire's heart pounded in her chest, and she fought the urge to look away. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing Richard say it out loud made everything feel so real. She tried to keep her voice steady. Richard's gaze softened. I know we did. But it's not just business anymore. Not for me. And I don't think it is for you, either." Claire's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of his words pressed down on her, and she felt a mixture of fear and longing. She had spent so much time telling herself that she wasn't going to fall for him, that she couldn't allow herself to. But the truth was, she was already there, and she wasn't sure how to get out. "Richard," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "we can't just ignore what this is. We've already crossed a line, and it's not just going to go away. We need to figure out what happens next." Richard reached across the table and took her hand in his. His touch was warm, comforting, and Claire couldn't help but feel a spark of something deep inside. "I'm not asking you to ignore it. I'm asking you to face it with me." Claire looked down at their hands, her mind racing. She had been fighting this for so long, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to let go of what they had. Not now. Not when it felt so real. For a long moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the restaurant around them. Claire finally lifted her head to meet Richard's eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to let go of the fear that had been holding her back. Richard smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "That's all I can ask for," he said. "Let's figure this out together." They sat there, hand in hand, surrounded by the noise of the world outside, but for them, it was as if everything else had faded away. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to find out, together. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Richard and Claire face new challenges and discover what it truly means to be together. Can they make their love work despite the odds? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. After that night, things between Richard and Claire started to change. They were no longer just pretending to be a married couple for the sake of business. Now, they were navigating the complexities of their feelings for each other. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead was unclear, but they both knew one thing. They couldn't keep pretending it wasn't real. They had to face the truth of what was happening between them, no matter how difficult it was. Richard found himself thinking about Claire constantly. It was hard not to. She had become such an integral part of his life in a way he hadn't anticipated. Every time they met, whether it was for a business dinner or a simple conversation, he felt a connection with her that went beyond the contract they had signed. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her to become someone he relied on, someone he could trust. Claire, too, was feeling the shift. She had tried to keep her emotions in check, but it was becoming impossible to ignore the pull between them. The way Richard had opened up to her, the way he had let his guard down in moments of vulnerability, made her see him in a new light. She had always known he was more than the cold, calculating businessman everyone saw. But now, seeing the real Richard, the one who cared, who felt deeply, who needed someone. She couldn't help but feel drawn to him. But even as they grew closer, doubts lingered. Claire wasn't sure if she could fully trust what was happening between them. Was this real? Or was it just the result of a deal gone too far? She had to remind herself that they had started this whole thing with a contract in place, with expectations that had nothing to do with love. Could she really let herself fall for someone like Richard? Could she trust him? One afternoon, Claire arrived at Richard's office to discuss some upcoming projects. She had been keeping her distance, still unsure about where things were heading. As she stepped inside his office, she found him sitting at his desk, looking out the window at the city below. There was something different about him today, something more open, more vulnerable. He turned to her as she entered. She stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "About what?" she asked, though she already had a feeling she knew what was coming. Richard stood up and walked over to her. He looked at her with those deep, searching eyes, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the world but the two of them. "About us," he said quietly. "About what this has become. I can't keep pretending this is just a business arrangement. I know we agreed to that at first, but it's not just business anymore, Claire. I can't ignore how I feel." Claire took a step back, her mind spinning. She had been expecting this, but hearing him say it out loud made everything feel so real, so inevitable. "Richard, we can't keep doing this. We've crossed a line, and I'm not sure I can trust that this is real. It's hard for me to know what to believe, especially with everything that's been going on." Richard's expression softened, and he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I understand," he said. "I know we started this with a contract, but I can't pretend it's still just that. I don't want it to be. I want to be with you, Claire. I want us to be real." For a moment, Claire didn't know how to respond. She had tried so hard to keep her feelings at bay, but now, standing here with Richard, feeling his warmth, his sincerity, she realized that she couldn't keep denying what was in her heart. She had fallen for him. She had known it for a while now, but admitting it to herself was one thing. Admitting it to him was another. Richard's grip on her hand tightened slightly, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm not asking you to undo anything. I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that what I'm offering isn't just another business deal. It's me, Claire. I want to build something real with you. I want us to figure this out together." Claire looked at him, her heart torn between the fear of getting hurt and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. She had tried to keep things professional, to keep everything under control, but now, with Richard standing in front of her, looking so vulnerable and so determined, she realized she couldn't fight it anymore. Richard's face softened with understanding. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But I'm willing to take that chance, Claire. I don't want to live with the regret of not trying. We can't control everything, but we can control this. We can choose to be real, together." The silence in the room was thick, but for the first time, it didn't feel heavy. It felt like an invitation to take a chance on something that might just be worth it. Claire knew that she couldn't keep running from her feelings. She had to face them, no matter what. "Okay," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Let's try." Richard smiled, the weight of the world seeming to lift off his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise I won't let you down." Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Richard and Claire begin to build something real, facing new challenges and discovering what it means to truly trust each other. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. After agreeing to give their relationship a real chance, Richard and Claire found themselves navigating uncharted waters. Things were no longer just a business deal. They were trying to build something meaningful, something real. They spent more time together outside of work, attending social events, having dinner, and even sharing quiet moments that made Claire realize just how much she had come to care for him. Yet, despite their growing connection, there was still a sense of uncertainty hanging between them. Could this really work? Was this just an infatuation, or was it something deeper? One evening, Richard invited Claire to a charity gala that his company was sponsoring. It was a formal event, full of influential people, and he knew that it was important for them to appear as a united couple in front of their business partners. But it was more than that for him. He wanted to show Claire how serious he was about their relationship. He wanted her to see that he was willing to commit to something beyond the contract they had signed. He wasn't just doing this for the business. He was doing it for her. Claire was nervous as she prepared for the evening. It wasn't that she wasn't excited about the gala. She was, but it felt like another test. Would she be able to fully embrace her feelings for Richard in front of everyone? Could she put the walls down that she had built up so carefully for so long? She wasn't sure. The night promised to be full of challenges, and she wasn't certain that she was ready to face them. When Claire arrived at the gala, Richard was waiting for her at the entrance, looking as composed as ever in his tailored suit. He smiled when he saw her, his eyes lighting up in a way that made her heart flutter. She was taken aback for a moment. He had a way of making everything feel just a little brighter, just a little more possible. Claire smiled back, though there was still a twinge of uncertainty in her chest. She nodded, and together, they made their way into the grand ballroom. The atmosphere was filled with elegance, people talking in hushed tones, the clink of glasses echoing across the room. Claire could feel the weight of the event, the expectations, the eyes on them. She had never been one to enjoy the spotlight, but tonight felt different. It was like she was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. As the night went on, Richard and Claire moved through the crowd, engaging in conversations with business associates, laughing at the right moments, smiling when necessary. But there was a connection between them that no one could ignore. Every time Richard looked at her, Claire felt it. His sincerity, his devotion, the way he saw her as more than just the woman in a contract. Later in the evening, as they stepped outside for some fresh air, away from the buzz of the gala, Richard turned to her, his expression softer than it had been all night. Claire looked at him, her heart racing. It was moments like this that made her question everything she thought she knew. She had tried so hard to keep her emotions at bay, but every time Richard spoke to her like this, every time he showed her just how much he cared, it became harder to deny what was happening between them. Richard reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing against her skin. "You don't have to be ready, Claire," he said softly. "We can take it one step at a time. I'm not asking for anything more than your trust, and I'll be here every step of the way." Claire looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity in his words. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. That maybe this wasn't a fleeting moment, but something real. She reached up and placed her hand over his, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the moment. Richard smiled, his eyes filled with hope and something else, a promise. They stood there for a moment, both of them knowing that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to face it together. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Richard and Claire continue their journey together, facing new challenges and discovering what it truly means to trust each other. Can they overcome their fears and build something real? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. The weeks that followed were both exhilarating and challenging for Richard and Claire. They had made the decision to give their relationship a real chance, but it was far from easy. The pressure of their roles, his as CEO and hers as a high-level PR specialist, kept them busy, but it was the personal struggles that seemed to weigh heaviest on their hearts. Richard was constantly battling with his past fears of failure and vulnerability, while Claire struggled with her trust in him, unsure if she could truly open herself up. Yet, despite the difficulties, they were starting to feel the weight of something stronger between them, something real. One afternoon, Claire was at Richard's office, reviewing a new marketing campaign they were launching. The atmosphere was light, filled with conversations about their future goals and plans, yet the unsaid feelings between them seemed to linger. Richard had been quieter than usual, as if he was waiting for something. Claire, sensing his tension, looked up from her papers and met his gaze. Claire set her pen down, the weight of his words sinking in. "And?" she asked, though she knew what was coming. Claire's heart skipped a beat. She had been so focused on keeping her emotions in check that hearing Richard speak so honestly about his feelings took her by surprise. She had always been cautious with her heart, but now, with Richard standing in front of her, she realized how much she wanted to believe in them. Richard stepped closer to her, his hand gently brushing against hers. "I know, but I'm not asking you to be perfect, Claire. I'm just asking you to trust that this," he paused, taking a breath, "is real. I want to build something with you. Something that goes beyond the contract, beyond the deal. I want this to be something we both choose." Claire looked at him, her mind racing. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this wasn't just a fleeting moment in their lives. But the fear of losing herself again, of giving too much of herself, held her back. Richard's eyes widened, a spark of hope in his gaze. Anything. Promise me that we will always be honest with each other. No more hiding behind contracts or pretending. We have to be real with each other, no matter what. Richard smiled, the weight of his past lifting slightly as he nodded. I promise, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. We'll be real, Claire. No more pretending. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt a sense of peace. She had made the decision to trust him, to trust herself, and to face the future together. They didn't know where this path would lead, but they knew they were ready to take the journey as partners, side by side. As the days passed, Richard and Claire continued to navigate the complexities of their relationship, but with each passing moment, they grew stronger together. They faced challenges, both personal and professional, but they learned to communicate more openly, to be there for each other in ways they never had before. The bond between them deepened, and with each step forward, they realized that what they had was something worth fighting for. Stay tuned for the next part of the story, where Richard and Claire's love is tested in unexpected ways, but their commitment to each other continues to grow stronger. Can they overcome the obstacles in their way, or will their fears hold them back? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss it. As Richard and Claire moved forward, their relationship continued to evolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. The foundation they had built together, founded on trust and honesty, began to show signs of true depth. There were still challenges to face, of course, but every obstacle felt more like an opportunity to grow together, rather than something that would pull them apart. The pressure of business deals, the complexities of their public image, and even the nagging doubts they both harbored, none of it felt as heavy when they faced it together. One evening, as they sat in Richard's penthouse, reflecting on how far they had come, Claire felt a warmth she hadn't realized was missing. The business world still had its demands, and the uncertainties of the future lingered, but for the first time, the idea of us felt more real than ever. As Richard looked at her, there was no pretension, no hidden agendas, just the quiet understanding that they were in this together. Richard smiled, leaning back into his chair as he looked at her. Me neither. I thought I had everything figured out before, but it turns out I was missing the most important thing, someone to share it with. The sincerity in his voice touched Claire deeply, and for a moment, all the fears and doubts she had carried with her seemed to fade. She had let go of the walls she had built up, and now, she found herself fully embracing the life she was building with Richard. Their journey together had not been without its bumps. They had both stumbled, questioned their decisions, and wondered if it was all worth it. But through it all, they had found one undeniable truth. They were better together. I never expected any of this to happen, Claire continued. This started as a business deal, a way out of our own personal struggles, but I've come to realize that it's so much more than that. Richard reached across the table and took her hand in his. I know exactly what you mean. I started this with one goal in mind, to save my company, to preserve my legacy. But I didn't realize that, along the way, I'd find someone who could change my entire life. You're the reason I've rediscovered what really matters. The quiet intensity in his words stirred something in Claire, and without thinking, she stood and walked over to him. Standing before him, she felt her heart swell with emotion. This was real. This was no longer just about contracts and agreements. This was about love, commitment, and the future they were building together. Richard stood up as well, moving closer to her. Claire, he said, his voice low, I know we've been through a lot, but I can't imagine my life without you. I want to make this official, not just as a business arrangement or a contract, but because you mean everything to me. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had no words, only the overwhelming feeling that this was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment where everything shifted from pretend to real, from just surviving to truly living. Richard, she whispered her, voice filled with emotion, you've already made my life better in ways I never imagined. I'm ready to take the next step with you. With that, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. As he opened it, Claire gasped. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, and beautiful. Claire, he said, will you marry me? Not just for the business, not because of anything other than the fact that I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want us to be real, in every sense of the word. For a moment, Claire stood still, overwhelmed by the love and sincerity in his eyes. Then, with tears welling up, she smiled and nodded. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Richard's face lit up with a smile that could have lit up the entire room. He slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their commitment to each other. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they didn't feel the need to control it. They had each other, and that was enough. Stay tuned for the next part of their story as Richard and Claire take the next steps in their journey together. What challenges will they face next, and how will their love continue to grow? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next chapter.